Hello and welcome to this introduction to this very broad topic, really more of an umbrella topic called conversations. Everything about conversations, including the conversational domain itself. And I want to talk about a certain class of conversations in particular. And this is the full strength version, by the way, so I'm not going to mince my words here. Please see the soft and easy version if you want something more watered down. But the full strength version is that there are certain elephant in the room conversations that simply need to happen, however uncomfortable they may be. So let me give you just one example, just one very example from daily life, right? And that's the topic of do we humans continue to eat other animals, or do we go plant-based in our diets, right? I personally, full disclosure, am on a journey towards 100% plant-based, but I have not achieved that yet, full disclosure. And that requires a conversation. It requires that we have a conversation on multiple different levels. So I think a World Cafe would be perfect for it. But for me, that's an elephant in the room conversation. If there are folks who believe strongly that we should continue to kill and eat animals, right? And, you know, whether in a context of animal agriculture or in a context of hunting, it's time for a conversation about that. And is it going to be uncomfortable? I guarantee you it'll be uncomfortable, right? It's uncomfortable territory, and it's necessary. What could be the outcomes of such a conversation? We, and who's the we, and who the hell do we think we are, kind of thing. Fine, those are valid conversations. But we, the participants, really might come to the conclusion that we need to go 100% plant-based as a species, period. We just got to do it. Now, how do we achieve that? How do we implement that? Is a whole different kettle of fish, or kettle of vegan fish substitute, if you prefer, right? So that's an example of a conversation that needs to be had, however uncomfortable. And again, or another outcome could be, hey, leave it up to each locality, let them sort it out for themselves. I know that Alan Savory, for example, has some very controversial opinions on the matter. And the bottom line is, it's time for a conversation. To eat meat or not to eat meat, meat and dairy, that is the question. So that is a more, from daily life, I would just say, because it's just more and more in the conversation these days, plant-based versus not. And but other conversations that are going to be uncomfortable are going to be, what do we need to do to cool an overheating planet? The planet's overheating exponentially. We need to have that conversation, right? And same with the conversation around feeding everyone, same with the conversation around decommissioning all forms of nuclear. Likewise, dozens of different conversations that urgently need to be had. And then there's the giant elephant in the room, the biggest of all the elephants in the room, which is the togetherness conversation. How do we come together? How do we do this togetherness thing? Do we do this togetherness thing? Or is the answer laissez-faire, let the market sort it out, and everyone stays separate and competing with everyone else in this all-day monopoly game called global capitalism, which has now gone on for about 12,000 years since the agricultural revolution, with disastrous effects? We need to have that conversation, that elephant in the room conversation. Global capitalism, right? Money, it's time for a conversation, right? There are those who aspire to a world beyond money, which is the name of one of our series on Block Party, led by Brett Warshawski, which is just freaking awesome, a world beyond money. So there are so many elephant in the room conversations that need to be had. you know, where do we begin? We begin with togetherness. How do we come together, right? And another fundamental one is, you know, this is literally the title. Where are we at, right? Where are we at? The is intentional. It implies that we don't know where we're at. And it's like, you know, it's kind of like, it's a bit late to be asking this question. Well, better late than never. Let's ask the darn question. Where are we in the death spiral, right? How much time do we have left? What do we need to do first, second, third, right? And that spills over into, you know, are we there yet? That's a conversation. How, you know, how will we know when we're there, right? Where do we want to get to? What's the goal, right? So there's where we're at now. There's where we want to get to, right? And where we're at now may have some first, second, and third derivatives that we don't particularly like. In other words, we're in a bit of a death spiral, frankly. This is the full strength version, as you were warned. Where are we at? What are our, you know, and first n derivatives? And where do we want to get to? And then finally, what's the pathway to get us there? Which is a conversation around strategy. That's what I call plan A, just to make it controversial, because what I'm suggesting is that there might be a singular plan. At any moment, consider that if there's a whole bunch of different plans on the table and under discussion, right, at any given time, there'll be a market leader, a most popular plan, right? That's something to be reckoned with, right? And it's important. I mean, that's one way of thinking. That for me, that's kind of like a way of overcoming the fundamental question of, you know, that we're not going to get unanimity. Well, of course, we're never going to get unanimity, but there'll always be a market leader. There'll always be a number one brand in terms of plans to get us there. There will be a number one brand for the there that we want to aspire to. Will there be different brands of reality? Where are we at right now? I'm undoubtedly, right? So we need to have conversations about all these. Where are we at? Where do we want to get to? And how do we want to get there, right? World Cafe is one way to start. In terms of these conversations, there's one thing I really want to highlight around the topic of context, and I'll give a proper introduction to that topic later. But, you know, take the conversation, you know, where do we need to get to? And how do we need to get there, right? Let's focus on how do we need to get there. When I have that conversation, I really only want to be having that conversation with people who fundamentally get it. What's there to get? With people who fundamentally get just how severe the current exponential planetary overheating is, and where this is bound to take us in the next couple of years maximum, right? And again, this is the full strength version. I really don't have, when it comes to talking about solutions and how we need to get there, I really don't want to mix that conversation with conversations that fundamentally involve getting people up to speed as to how bad the current situation is. You see what I'm saying? So and that's context. What's the context for the conversation? This conversation builds upon the assumption that basically says, you know, Professor Guy McPherson is right. Okay. And in terms of the severity of the exponential planetary overheating, right? And the 67 self-reinforcing feedback loops, right? Many of which are quite severe and relentless, and all of which add up to the drivers of the meanest exponential I think I've ever seen, right? It's borderline unthinkable, but it's here. You know, that's why it's this giant elephant in the room. So I want to have that conversation about what do we need to do, you know, that's going to have a strong focus on SRM, not as the first solution implemented, but as a key solution that needs to get implemented ASAP. and I point to the conversation FUNC, F-U-N-C, which I give an introduction to under solutions. So please check that out for more on, where I want to go with that conversation. Fair enough. But the reality is that these conversations don't just need to be for people who think like Jamin, right? We need to have these conversations coming from whatever contexts people are coming from, right? There's, again, a whole conversation to be had around context and contexts plural, and how we can be very thoughtful about how we mash up different contexts in a given conversation, where we have a kind of a mixer of different contexts. There's a whole kind of emerging science around that, and it's pretty exciting stuff. So I'll talk about that in the topic of context. Anyway, I guess that's about as deep as I want to go right now, into the topic of these conversations, these elephant in the room conversations that we just need to sit down and have, however uncomfortable. Okay, so please join us. We'll see you there. Thank you.